The doctor is in. Thanks for coming back, everybody. Today I'm going to be continuing my discussion about the world building that went into creating my debut novel, The Last Warpiper. I'm Doc Swift, so let's get into it. Dragons are fairly old hat in fantasy tales, and I wanted to create dragons for The Last Warpiper setting that were distinct from the sort of typical fantasy fare. Partly that's because, based on film, for the most part, I think we're starting to see something of a standard design for dragons. If you look at Dragonheart from the 90s to the Hobbit movies with Smaug to Game of Thrones, aside from some minor differences, the dragons all kind of look alike, and that I consider sort of perhaps a failing in the design for the film itself, but also just the popularity of fantasy settings and how they are derivative of one another and reflective of one another. If you look at How to Train Your Dragon, one of the things that I thought made that film, a little charming was the fact that there were so many different types of dragons that all appeared unique and distinct. Now, some of them were what you might consider a stereotypical sort of dragon, but others were clearly not based on the common image that people might picture when they think of a dragon. Now, while what we're seeing in movies maybe, somewhat hitting a rut, if you look at cultures from around the world, there are many different types of dragons than what we see in Western film. For the dragons in The Last Warpiper and the setting where it takes place, I wanted to use influences other than just modern film and television. So partly I took some inspiration from Eastern dragons. Instead of the quadrupedal sort of almost feline dragon, the way that some of these dragons move and act, it seems like the production designers or the 3D animators, whoever is ultimately in charge of this, they give them some sort of like a feline character in their movement. I wanted to make my dragons more serpentine. So if you look at Eastern dragons, you can see they don't resemble Western dragons, like the type that I was talking about already. So, first of all, by making them more serpentine, doing away with being quadrupeds, I also did away with the wings. And admittedly, because I'm a fan of the original Clash of Titans movie, I really loved the design of the Medusa by the Harryhausens, or by Harryhausen, and I liked that there were arms, but no legs. So my dragons, they have arms, they don't have legs, they also do not have wings. They're scaly because they're reptilian, from tip of the nose to tip of the tail. I also wanted to give them something of a monstrous appearance because they are one of the species of monsters in this setting. So I made sure to give them horns. I didn't want them just to be snakes with arms. I wanted to give them other characteristics. So they have horns, kind of like ram's horns. They are intelligent. They speak the same language as the main character, as the other non-human races of man. Now, of course, parenthetically, I want to note that this is something of a nod to the theory that in the history of humanity, at one time, all people spoke the same language. So I've kind of adapted that notion from anthropology to this setting. Back to dragons. These dragons can breathe fire. I don't want to reveal too much, but in Clash of the Titans, Medusa's blood was corrosive. That is something of something of a classic notion regarding dragons from folklore, where their blood was acidic or corrosive. The dragons in my setting, they're venomous, so that's a notion or a nod to their serpentine nature. I wanted them also to be able to bite, not necessarily with breathing fire, but to bite, to poison either their enemies or their food source. And if you think about the fact that they have a venomous bite, it makes you wonder what is it that the dragon might encounter that is so dangerous that they developed a venomous bite. So that's something to consider. That's just a little seed that I planted without really calling attention to it. And of course, the dragons are enormous. They can swallow a grown man whole without any challenge. The whole idea with designing the dragons for my setting was I wanted them to be monstrous. I didn't want them to be cute. I didn't want them to be entirely derivative of other fantasy settings. At the same time, while I wanted them to be unique, I also wanted them to be recognizable as dragons just based on the description. So, while some of the traits of dragons in other settings, such as perhaps the horns, the ability to speak, I also wanted to inject various other traits to set these apart. Dragons are intelligent, they're clever, they're not to be dismissed as beasts of burden. You won't see anyone riding a dragon, you won't see anyone controlling a dragon and ordering it about. You also won't see the typical classical notion of a dragon jealously and zealously guarding its hoard of treasure. I actually have a little spin that I put on that notion in The Last Warpiper. For those of you who have the book and have read it, I hope you'll let me know what you think of my interpretation of dragons. This is going to be different than dragons in another setting that I'm working on. So I don't want to be derivative of myself any more than I want to be derivative of those who've come before. So that's really all I have to say about how I went about creating my dragons. I think my next video, I want to talk a little bit about the cultures of the various races. And at the same time, I want to visit or revisit a little bit of the races when I spoke about them before, to talk about some of the weaknesses relative to one another that I built in to provide a sort of balance of power between the different races of men. You know, the cat people, the humans, the bear folk, and so on. So that's all I have to say for this video. Please let me know what you think, especially if you've read the book. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'll see you next time. The Doctor is out.